Hey all, Brian S. Pratt here. So, chapter 32 and the epilogue. Yeah, I'll do both. So the conclusion to Warrior Priest of Dmon-li, third book of the Morcyth Saga. And then tomorrow we'll start it on Trail of the Gods. So, James and company are at the foot of the Dragon's Pass. They camped out. Now they're going to head to it, and they should arrive safely in Trendle. This is one of my favorite books, I have to admit. It's not my most favorite book of the Morcyth Saga. That would probably be number 6. And number 7 felt like it would never end when I was writing it. It just went on and on and on and on. But I wrapped up everything, and hopefully logically. Now I'm just curious, who all is still with me? In the first 24 hours of this video, who actually is watching it? If you could just throw me a line. I'm just curious. And if you haven't subscribed already, please do so. Thank you to those who have done so. And like and comment, share, all that good stuff. Anyway, here we go. Let's finish up with the Warrior Priest. As dawn crept upon the eastern sky, they had a quick bite to eat before saddling the horses. "We should reach Trendle sometime tomorrow," Ilan announced. He took the lead as they moved toward the pass. Appearing from out of the pass emerged about 20 horsemen. One brought a horn to his lips and blared forth 3 quick notes. Answering horns were heard sounding from all around. Ilan brought them to a stop. "James," Michael said as he brought his horse closer, "what's happening?" From all sides, horsemen appeared. Jiron's knife leapt into his good hand as he took in the hundreds of approaching horsemen moving to surround them. Suddenly, a familiar tingling sensation began to make itself known. He looked through the pass and saw 4 horsemen detached from the others. They moved toward where James and the others waited. One of them was dressed in armor. Recognition sent a shudder through him. "Abula-Maski," he breathed. "What?" Jiron asked. Pointing to the riders from the pass, coming from the pass, James said, "Abula-Maski. It seems he didn't die when the catacombs collapsed." "Who is he?" asked Jory. "A warrior priest of Dmon-li," he replied. "I thought we'd rid ourselves of him some time ago." The surrounding riders moved to within 100 yards before coming to a stop. James recognized the Wolf clan, as well as patterns from 2 other clans from the gathering. "How do they know to be here?" Michael asked. "I don't know," replied James, as he kept his eye on the approaching warrior priest. The others with him looked to be the chiefs of the clans. James recognized them from when he'd been questioned before the council. "It looks as if they wish to parley," Ilan said as he glanced at James. "Should we?" Jiron asked. "I don't trust him to be honorable." "Neither do I," agreed James. But if it holds off an immediate attack, perhaps I should go and see what they have to say." Turning to Michael, he said, "You stay here." "Okay," Michael replied. As he rode out to meet with Abula-Maski, Ilan and Jiron joined him. He saw that the warrior priest had not come away unscathed from his ordeal in the catacombs. His face was horribly marred, and his armor looked to have been crushed and then reshaped. Strong indeed must be the magic of Dmon-li to allow him to survive such punishment. Both parties halted once they were 10 feet away from each other. The chief of the Grey Wolf clan looked at James with undisguised hatred. "Abula-Maski," James began. "What an unexpected pleasure." "I'll make this simple," the warrior priest said. "I want the one carrying the star. The rest can go free. Resist, and you will all die." Pulling out the star, he showed it to him and asked, "Why is this so troubling to you?" Abula-Maski's eyes locked on the stars as he replied, "Priest of Morcyth, I'd strike you down now if I didn't need you alive." James contemplated the situation quickly and came to the conclusion that there would be no way their party could withstand the combined might of the clan riders and the magic of Abula-Maski. Either one by themselves, maybe, but not together. Then an idea formed in his mind, one he didn't care too much for, but realized there may not be any other way for them to live through this. "I have a proposition." "What?" Abula-Maski asked. "I propose we each choose a champion to decide the outcome," explained James. "If yours wins, I go with you willingly. If mine wins, you allow us to continue unhindered." A smile most evil and cruel spread across the face of Abula-Maski. "Swear upon the star, priest of Morcyth, and I'll agree to your proposal." Holding the star high, James said, I swear to go with the warrior priest, Abula-Maski, should his champion win. Very well, priest, he said. I agree. Give us a few minutes to prepare, and our champion will return to this spot. You have 10 minutes, no more, he warned. Nodding, James replied, that is agreeable. Both parties turned around and returned to the others waiting for them. When James, Ilan, and Jiron arrived, Uther said, I know how they knew to be here. Every eye turned to him as James asked, how? Gesturing to the group of riders in the pass, he said, if you look, you'll see the man who was outside our door just before we left. They turned, and sure enough, the man whom they had chased out from in front of their door back at the inn in Sea Star was among them. Damn, Il exclaimed. I thought he was working for Councilman Rillian. So did we all, Jiron added. Maybe he was, Jiron suggested. What he'd heard could have been relayed from Councilman Rillian to them. True, agreed Ilan. They must have killed their horses to get here so fast. So what happened? Pfeiffer asked. James filled them in on the words exchanged and the deal he'd made. At hearing that, Jiron said, James, there is no way I can win a fight with my shoulder the way it is. Besides, Ilan said, there's only one person he's going to select as a champion, and that would be himself. The warrior priests are terrible foes. I don't believe I've ever heard of one bested by anyone. Who among us could ever hope of defeating a warrior priest of Dmon-li? James glanced around at their faces until he settled on one, another warrior priest of Dmon-li. Staring back into James's eyes, Michael took a sudden intake of breath. What? Are you crazy? He glanced around at the others and said, I'm no warrior, let alone a match for someone like Abula-Maski. Ilan glanced from Michael to James and back to Michael. His head began to nod slowly as he said, perhaps. Michael turned his attention to Ilan. You can't be serious. I've seen you fight, son. He gestured at the rest of those gathered before continuing. None of us can even hope to match what you do. You're the only choice. James, Jiron said to him, we can't take that risk. Not with... I know, he replied. But that's just what I'm counting on. With it, MIko has a chance to beat him. The others looked confused, not understanding what they were talking about. James turned to Henny. Give your armor to MIko. I think you're about the same size. As a younger member of Miller's band removed his armor, James came to MIko and said, you can do this. There really is no one else. Michael's eyes showed the fear and doubt that he felt. James leaned closer and whispered so only he could hear, the fire will aid you. It already has in every single battle you fought. He looked him in the eye. I believe you can do it. But what if I lose myself for good, he asked. It's been harder each time to come back out of it. I won't let that happen, James assured him. I promise. Jory and Uther came and helped him put on Henny's armor. Let me have your sword, James said. What are you going to do? A pile formed at his feet from all the excess equipment Jory and Uther removed in order to make room for Henny's armor. The only pouch he retained was the one containing the fire. Make it stronger, better able to withstand whatever he may do, he replied. He held the sword out before him and concentrated as he readied the magic. Hoping he remembered enough from television documentaries he'd seen about metallurgy and sword making, he let the magic flow as he worked on removing the impurities and strengthening the iron into steel. He stood there for 5 minutes as he worked. When he at last felt it was complete, he stopped the spell and handed the sword to Ilan. Tell me what you think. Taking the sword, he tested it for balance and weight, all the while nodding approvingly. Then he checked the edge by running his thumb along it. The barest of pressure cut through the skin and a drop of blood welled forth. He held the sword out and then turned to Pfeiffer. Take out your sword and strike it. Pfeiffer removed his sword, and while Ilan held the sword in a blocking position, struck it hard. When the sword struck Michael's, it rang out, and Ilan said, Again! Strike! 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 3 more times, Pfeiffer hit MIko's sword. After the third strike, Ilan nodded again and gestured for Pfeiffer to halt. Turning to where MIko stood, now dressed in armor, he said, "This sword is better than any other I've ever seen." Handing it to him, hilt first, he continued, "It will serve you well." "Thank you," he said, taking it. Placing it within the scabbard, he glanced at James. "I'm scared." "I know," he said. Then a horn sounded from those within the pass, and they turned to see Abula-Maski returning on foot with the clan chiefs. "It's time," James announced. James, Ilan, and Jiron once again accompanied MIko out to where the duel would take place. With dread, MIko advanced toward the spot where he would meet Abula-Maski in combat. "I can't do this," he thought. Fear threatened to steal his nerve and his strength. When the two groups met, Abula-Maski asked, "So, who plans to die today?" "None of us, actually," James said. He gestured to MIko. "Here's our champion." Looking around at those with Abula-Maski, he added, "And which of you is brave enough to meet him?" The clan chiefs broke into gruff laughter as Abula-Maski said, "I had thought this to be a serious match." "It is," James assured him. "He is far better than you could imagine." Looking upon MIko, Abula-Maski's expression showed he seriously doubted MIko's abilities. He could clearly see the fear and doubt radiating from him. "Okay," he said, "so be it. I will be my own champion, for there is none better than I. Just one thing before we begin." "What?" "Should we win," he replied, and then pointed to the clan chiefs, "I want your word that they will not attack, nor will they try to seek vengeance of any kind." With an amused smile upon his face at the very thought, Abula-Maski said, "You have it. Very well then." The clan chiefs backed away from Abula-Maski as he drew his sword. James felt a prickling as the warrior priest called the magic. He put his hands on MIko's shoulders and looked him in the eye. MIko looked back with naked fear at the thought of facing Abula-Maski in battle. "You can do this," James asserted in total confidence. Then in a hushed whisper added, "The fire will protect you." "How can you be sure?" "I just am," James replied. "Trust me." He continued gazing at MIko until receiving a barely perceptible nod. MIko turned to face the warrior priest. Drawing his sword, he stepped forward as James and the others stepped back. He watched as MIko closed with Abula-Maski and noticed how his movements were subtly changing, becoming more streamlined and relaxed. The fire was beginning to take control. With sword ready, MIko waited for Abula-Maski's attack. When it came, it was so incredibly fast that no one even realized he'd even attacked before MIko's sword moved to block it. The clash of swords slowly died away, and the clan chiefs murmured among themselves. They cast looks from Abula-Maski and then to where James waited with the others. As he watched MIko and Abula-Maski circle each other, Ilan said, "He might be able to win." James watched the man who only a short time ago had been but a boy in the streets of Bern circle the deadliest fighter ever encountered. "Let's hope so." "If he does," Jiron said as he pointed to the clan chiefs, "do you think they will abide by Abula-Maski's word?" "I doubt it," replied James. "But let's worry about that after MIko wins." He looked at Jiron, who gave him a nod. Clang, clang! Their swords moved at speed so fast the eyes of the onlookers weren't capable of following. Then suddenly, Abula-Maski disengaged and backed up. He looked at MIko with a newfound respect. This wasn't any ordinary foe. Oh, hang on. This was no ordinary foe, he realized. Suddenly, the tingling James had been feeling since the beginning of the match spiked. He tried calling forth magic to help MIko, but was too late. A ball of fire shot forth from Abula-Maski to MIko and exploded in a giant fireball. When the smoke cleared, MIko remained standing, untouched. A reddish shell that for a moment had enveloped him began to dissipate. He glanced to the warrior priest and saw the look of utter amazement upon his face. Smiling in satisfaction, James hollered, "Go, MIko!" MIko didn't acknowledge his support. Instead, he strode confidently forward and went on the offensive. With incredible speed, he launched into a series of attacks that Abula-Maski successfully blocked. But instead of pausing, he kept on attacking and actually succeeded in forcing him back 2 steps before ending the series of blows. Enraged at the temerity of this young man, Abula-Maski lashed out with his magic again and watched as bolts of energy were deflected by the red-tinged barrier. Using an attack combining both magic and sword, he went on the offensive. The magic was countered while Michael's sword blocked the attacks. At this time, Pfeiffer and the others had come and joined James's group. "Incredible," he said to James as he stood next to him. Glad I'm not out there," admitted Jiron. One second. A jubilant cry from Abula-Maski, and they watched as Michael's sword went sailing through the air and landed point first into the dirt 10 feet away. "MIko!" James cried. Then suddenly, the sword was no longer on the ground, but once again in Michael's hand as he again went on the offensive. A series of blows had Abula-Maski giving ground, and in disbelief, everyone watched as Michael's sword ripped through his armor leggings and sliced the thigh beneath. Michael had drawn first blood. Abula-Maski took a few steps back to gather himself, a strange expression now upon his face. He glanced down at the blood dripping from the cut on his thigh. It wasn't deep and would hardly even slow him down. But to score on a warrior priest, inconceivable! Never had such happened to Abula-Maski. He looked at his opponents and saw the glazed look in his eyes that looked as if they see nothing, yet saw everything. His senses told him that there was nothing magical about this boy, yet he had managed to counter everything he'd thrown at him. For the first time in Abula-Maski's very long life, he began to believe he may have met his match. During his brief pause in the fighting, James took a look at the riders who surrounded them. Relieved to find them still in their original position, he turned his attention to the clan chiefs. The expressions on their face showed the fight was not going as they had anticipated. They had thought it would be quick and decisive. Now they had doubts as to whether Abula-Maski would even win. He saw them huddled together, talking while at the same time keeping their attention fixed on the fighting. "I think they're planning something," James said to the others. "Will they go against the agreement?" asked Kenny. "Wouldn't put it past them," he said. "From the short time I've been around them, I haven't known them to be all that honorable." "What should we do?" asked Uther. "If Michael falls, I'll go with them and hope Abula-Maski will hold to his word," he explained. "Should Michael prevail, we better be prepared to fight." "I believe you're right," agreed Ellen. The clash of swords brought their attention back to the fighting. Abula-Maski had launched another series of blows, which Michael blocked successfully. A line opened up on Michael's forearm, where Abula-Maski's sword had scored. Not very deep, but they saw a small amount of blood run down his arm. Michael didn't even act as if he knew he'd been struck. That small victory gave Abula-Maski the impetus to win the fight. Launching into a series of blinding fast attacks, he actually managed to push Michael back several steps. But Michael hadn't even moved back very far before he again went on the offensive. In disbelief, Abula-Maski was almost not able to block the blows raining down upon him. How can he move so fast? Blow after blow, he successfully blocked, but each time he'd been almost a fraction of a second too late. Not stopping, the blows kept coming, and as unbelievable as it sounded, they were increasing in speed. He gasped when he saw twin fires in Michael's eyes, flames of unholy light that was familiar somehow. Like that was somehow familiar. Then suddenly, he recognized the truth. The fire! It was no longer hidden and was in the hands of this infidel. Once he realized that, he understood that he could not win this battle. But there was one more act that he must perform for his God before the end. He disengaged from the battle and saw Michael's sword slow as he moved backward. Readying himself, he watched Michael's approach, sword ready to resume the battle. From the sidelines, James watched as Abula-Maski took a few quick steps backward and came to a stop. The prickling suddenly intensified to a painful level, and he knew the warrior priest was about to cast a spell of mammoth proportions. He readied magic to counter whatever he may try to do. Suddenly, a psychic cry of tremendous power ripped through his head like a knife. "The fire walks with the star!" Everyone cried out from the pain as if they gripped their head, as they gripped their heads in an attempt to ease the agony. Through eyes blinded with pain-filled tears, James looked to the combatants and watched as Michael struck out at Abula-Maski, who, caught up in the spell, failed to defend himself. His sword struck him through the chest, and the psychic cry was abruptly silenced. Michael pulled out the sword and then hacked the warrior's priest off before following through with a slice that severed the head from the neck. When the psychic cry stopped, so did the pain. James looked up in time to see Abula-Maski's head hit the ground. He heard a cheer from Henny and Carol as they began running to congratulate MIko. "Stop!" he ordered commandingly. They stopped and turned to look back. "Don't go near him," James said, with as much authority as he could muster. Moving past them, he brought himself near to where MIko now stood motionless. He walked around until he stood face to face with his friend. "MIko?" he asked as he gazed into his eyes. He could see more changes the fire had wrought. All signs of Michael's childhood were now gone. What stood before him was a man in his early 20s at the least. "MIko?" he asked again. Then in a soothing voice, "It's James." James saw the fires burning in his eyes, and for the first time, worried that his friend may not come out of it. "MIko, come back to me," he said as he reached out his hand. Second. Then Michael's eyes took no. Then Michael took notice of him, and his sword moved to a guard position. James backed up a step and held up his hands. James backed a step and held up his hands, showing he was not armed. The fires raged as the eyes came to rest upon him. Pointing to a sack lined to a pile that had been removed from MIko, James yelled to Jiron, "Toss me that sack!" Not sure at first what he was talking about, Jiron looked down and then understanding came. Picking it up, he threw it to James, who caught it. "Would you like some tarts?" James asked as he pulled one from the sack, holding it up for MIko to see. Michael's expression changed suddenly and the fires began to diminish. "Tarts?" he asked in a faraway voice. "Yeah," James said, lowering his arm. "Here, have one." He watched some sort of internal struggle take place. "Yeah," James said, holding it out. "Here, have one." He watched some sort of internal struggle take place within MIko. Suddenly, the fires went out, and he knew that it was his friend who now looked out at him. "Oh, James," he said in a deep, manly voice, then took a step forward before collapsing. James moved quickly to catch him before he hit the ground. Laying him down, he waved the others to join them. Upon reaching them, Ellen said, "James, we got problems." Looking up from where he knelt next to MIko, James asked, "What?" Pointing to the past, he said, "Look, the clan chiefs had returned and mounted the horses. One of the riders with them brought a horn to his lips, and 2 loud notes sounded. Answering horns came from all sides as the riders who had done nothing during the fight now moved toward them in a decidedly hostile manner. Hundreds of riders were quickly closing the gap. Swords were being drawn and bows ready." James grabbed Jiron's arm, causing him to look at him. "You know what I must do." Jiron nodded and gathered the others around while James prepared to defend them. "Form a circle around James. Let nothing get close that may disrupt his concentration." Once he saw that they understood, he continued, "We may yet live through this." "Arrows!" hollered Pfeiffer as over 50 archers released their deadly arsenal. "Shields!" Elon hollered, and those with shields raised them to protect James. The others hid behind them as best they could. They watched as the arrows arced and then began their descent. Then unexpectedly, they bounced off the barrier that surrounded them. "What happened?" asked Carol. "James," replied Jiron, "that's what happened." They remained behind the shields as the deadly rain continued to fall, harmlessly bouncing off the invisible barrier. The sky began to darken as clouds moved in rapidly from all directions to merge together in the sky above. Those guarding James looked nervously at the rapidly changing sky. Ilan called out to them, "Stand fast!" The front line of riders crashed into the barrier that had so successfully stopped the rain of arrows. Horses and men cried out as they struck it hard. The snapping of bones filled the air. One man was thrown upward from his horse and landed atop the barrier itself. The defenders within watched as he slowly slid down the outer side to the ground. Henny cried out when a dozen translucent orbs appeared among them. "Don't worry," Jiron assured him. "James has lots of tricks." The orbs floated away in various directions. When they reached the barrier, they passed harmlessly through. The riders, beating upon the barrier, stepped back as the orbs floated harmlessly past before resuming their attempt to reach the barrier. "What are those?" Jiron asked. "Something nasty for them," Jiron replied. "You can be sure of that." The archers stopped the hail of arrows when they realized how ineffective they were. The wounded from the charge hitting the barrier were being taken away, and the mood among the riders was quickly becoming one of unease. In the sky above, the cloud cover was now dark, and the wind had begun blowing in earnest. Suddenly, a flash of lightning struck one of the translucent orbs, blasting over a dozen riders that happened to be near them. Zit! Wham! Another bolt struck an orb, and more riders were thrown aside by the force of the explosion. "That was bigger than the last," Uther exclaimed. "Look," Jory said as he pointed to one of the orbs. They're getting bigger." Hang on. Jiron glanced at James and saw he was beginning to pant, and sweat poured down his face. Shouting loud enough for all the defenders to hear, he hollered, "Should James lose consciousness, the barrier will fail. Then it will be up to us to finish this." "Bring it on," Jory hollered from where he stood shoulder to shoulder with Uther. Zit wham, zit wham, zit wham. Bolts struck orbs with more frequency, and riders were blasted away, only to fall lifeless to the ground. Once the last orb had been struck, it became eerily silent. The riders outside the barrier paused on what they were doing as they took notice of the quiet. "Illan!" Pfeiffer yelled as he pointed at James. James tilted to the side and looked as if he could barely remain upright. "Help him!" Illan commanded, and Pfeiffer went over and helped support him so he wouldn't fall over. To the others, Illan said, "It won't be long. Stand ready." From the clouds above, a swirling mass descended toward the riders outside the barrier. "What in the name of the gods is that?" Uther cried out. "A tornado!" Jiron replied, remembering the ones James had used in their escape from Al-Kur. The swirling mass of clouds smashed to the ground not far from them. Riders and horses caught within were thrown and broken. It moved toward the pass, and the chiefs waiting there. A cry went up from James as he used magic to split the tornado in two. The second half moved quickly in the opposite direction toward a large congregation of riders. The chiefs saw the tornado coming toward them and turned as they raced farther up into the pass, trying to outrun this whirling mass of death. "How is he?" Jiron shouted to Pfeiffer. "Not good," he replied. "His heart's beating fast and he's having trouble breathing." Jiron came over and knelt before him. "James, you've done enough." When it didn't look as if he was getting through to him, he shook him and hollered, "James, you can stop." Eyes suddenly popped open, and a great cry of pain escaped him. Then he suddenly jerked backward and lapsed into unconsciousness. The barrier collapsed, and the tornadoes began to dissipate. "All right, boys," Illan hollered. "Stay together and protect James and MIko." When the wind died and the tornadoes were gone, they took in the destruction James had wrought. Hundreds of men and horses lay dead and dying all around them. On the outskirts of the devastation, over 20 were still on their horses. They were all that remained of the host which had accompanied Abula-Maski. A horn from the pass announced the return of the chiefs and those within them. They paused momentarily as the horns blared again. "Here they come," Illan said to the others as both the riders in the pass and the ones on the outskirts broke into a gallop. They raced to attack. 2 archers remained and they fired off arrows, but none struck their mark. One managed to hit the ground within a foot of MIko, the other was deflected off Uther's shield. "Strike the horses if you can't get them in," Illan shouted as they braced for the attack. "Remain together." Illan positioned himself over James and MIko while the others formed a circle around them. Knife in his good hand, he stood firm as he watched the riders thunder close. The area around where the barrier had been was littered with the dead and provided some cover. Also, the charging riders had to slow when they reached it to prevent their horses from stumbling. Illan and the others moved to attack while the riders worked through the dead bodies. "Formatic!" the battle cry sounded as Uther's sword took out the first rider. Other cries were heard as the battle was joined. Henny and Carol stood shoulder to shoulder as they managed to hold their own against 3 riders. One horseless rider broke through the ring of defenders and raced for where Jiron waited. A smile crossed the rider's face when he saw a man with only one good arm who wielded nothing more than a dagger. Striking out at Jiron with his sword, the man was striking out striking out at Jiron with his sword. So sure of victory, he was surprised when Jiron easily deflected to the side. Suddenly crying out in the pain, the man fell to the ground after Jiron broke his knee with a well-placed kick. Trying to block Jiron's next attack, he swung his sword wildly. Jiron struck out with his foot again and connected with the man's groin. Then with his other foot, he kicked the man's sword arm, causing the sword to go flying. He then moved in with his knife and finished him. Standing up, he looked around at the battles going on around him. The defenders were taking a toll, especially Jory and Uther, who had a ring of bodies around them. Pfeiffer had 2 dead, while Ilin and Jiron accounted for 7. Carol suddenly cried out as a sword took him in the side. Henny quickly engaged the rider as his friend fell. Other riders came and joined the one fighting Henny. Jiron could tell he was not going to last long. Suddenly, to the south, more horns sounded. Jiron looked and saw dozens of riders approaching at a gallop. Damn! More reinforcements! The horns sounded again, and an answering horn came from the pass. The riders engaging the defenders suddenly broke off and raced to their waiting horses. Leaping atop them, they joined the riders coming from the pass. Jiron could see the clan chiefs giving them an ugly look that said that this wasn't over before they raced off to the west. The large group of riders coming from the south broke into 2 groups. The larger turned to follow the clan chiefs. The smaller group approached the scene of battle. "They're ours," said Ilin when he could make them out. Everyone alive?" he asked as he quickly took stock of the situation. Coming to where Henny sat with Carol, he realized Carol wasn't going to survive much longer. He knelt down as Carol turned his pain-filled eyes to him. "Did we win?" Carol asked. "Yes, son," Ilin said to him soothingly. "We did. You fought bravely, which saved the day." A smile spread across his face. When Henny looked up at him, hope in his eyes, he shook his head. Ilin got back up, patted Henny on the shoulder, and went to see how James and MIko were doing, leaving him alone to share Carol's last moments in peace. Jiron glanced up at his approach. "They're alive. Not sure if they'll make it, though. James isn't doing too well, and MIko, well, I can't even begin to guess about him. He doesn't respond, though he only had minor cuts and bruises." "Keep an eye on them," he said as he moved to greet the approaching riders. Jory and Uther joined him. He noticed Uther had a blood-soaked cloth tied around his arm and arched an eyebrow in question. "It's not bad," Uther explained. "Just a minor cut." Nodding, Ilin turned back to the riders. Once they came close, he held up his hand and said, "Thank you." The officer in charge said to his men, "Fan out and see if there are any left alive." As they moved to comply, he got down from his horse and greeted Ilin. "What the hell happened here?" The insignia on his uniform said he was a Matic cavalry captain. "We were set upon as we were about to enter the pass," Ilin explained. The officer gazed around at the hundreds of dead scattered about in the holes where the explosions had occurred. Then he turned his attention to Ilin and his group. "Are you all there is?" he asked incredulously. "Yes." "How did you manage to kill all of these and only lose 3? "Actually, we only lost 1, he clarified. Indicating James and MIko, he added, "Those 2 are just unconscious." "I see," the officer said. He held out his hand and said, "Name's Captain Harold." Taking the head, Ilin said, "Ilin, now, how did you do it?" "Can't really explain." Changing the subject, he asked, "How did you come to be here?" "Yesterday, the Empire's forces launched a major offensive against our line," he explained. "This group was seen to pass through while we were engaged with the others. Once reinforcements arrived and the line stabilized, I was sent to track them down." "Fortunate," Ilin commented. "Yes, it would seem so," Captain Harold said. "You wouldn't know anything about why they're here." "I'm sure I wouldn't know," Ilin said, straight-faced. "Uh-huh," he said, not sounding convinced. One of his men rode up and saluted. "A couple are still alive. Take them for questioning." Saluting, the rider returned and with others rounded up the survivors. "Where do you plan to go from here?" the captain asked. "Through the pass into Cardri," Ilin said. "And then?" "Who knows for sure," replied Ilin. Ilin noticed that someone, probably Jiron, had covered Abula-Maski's body to avoid questions. "We should be going," he told the captain. To Uther, he said, "Round up our horses. We'll bury Carol first and then head into the pass." Jory and Uther moved away as they began to round up the horses that had scattered during the battle. One second. "I'd still like to know how you did this," the captain demanded, not going to be balked further in this. Ilin turned to where Jiron sat by James and hollered, "Get the letter!" Nodding, Jiron searched James's pouch until he pulled out the letter. Getting up, he brought it over and handed it to Ilan, who then handed it to the captain. The captain opened it and read the words written upon it. His eyes widened when he realized whose signature was at the bottom. Finished, he returned the letter to Ilan. Okay then, he said. I'll not press you further. Lieutenant, he shouted. A rider came over and said, Yes, sir. Get the men and prisoners ready to ride. Saluting, the lieutenant again said, Yes, sir. Then he turned back to the rest of the men and began shouting orders. Once his men were ready to ride, the captain mounted and said, Good luck to you. You too, Captain, Ilan replied. Turning his horse out, the captain rode out with his men following behind. A string of horses held 10 wounded clan riders. As they rode away, Ilan moved to where Henny still cradled Carol's head in his lap. Even before he reached them, he knew Carol was dead. We have one more service to perform for Carol, he said to him gently. Looking up with tears streaming down his face, Henny said, He was a good friend. Yes, he was, Ilan agreed, but it's time we let him go. Nodding, Henny came to his feet and then picked up his friend. Over to the side, Jory and Uther had a grave prepared. When Henny got closer, they took Carol from him and gently lowered him in. They filled in the grave, and everyone gathered around as each told of some experience they'd had with Carol. When they were done, they secured James and MIko to their horses. Mounting, Ilan got them moving toward the pass and Cardri. All right, that's the end of 32. Now just a little epilogue, and we'll be done. So that was pretty exciting. I do tend to end my books with a battle. I just do. Kind of like in classical music, there's always a final boom. You know, in mine, there's a final battle. I like battles, and that one was pretty good. MIko saved the day, but it cost him an awful lot. Ultimately, it works out for him. For those who have read it, did I have that planned? That MIko would fight Abula-Maski? I don't really remember. I can't recall if I had or I had not. But Jiron was hurt. Otherwise, I'm pretty sure I would have had him do it. And I know I didn't injure Jiron's arm just so MIko would have to fight. I didn't do that. I don't think I did. That would have been pretty smart if that had been intentional, wouldn't it? Anyway, so they're free of the Empire. Abula-Maski is dead, but he sent that message, you know, the fire walks with a star. Now, obviously, that's not the true star of Morcyth, you know. The fire of Dmon-li is a focal point, you know. Morcyth's a god. So the fire, or the star of Morcyth, is the focal point. And James' medallion, though powerful and associated with Morcyth, and contains the holy might of Morcyth, is not Morcyth's focal point. I've always assumed James's medallion was like the 1960s Christopher Lee's cross in his vampire movies, you know, that sort of thing. Anyway, let's do the epilogue and we'll call it good, and we'll start in on the Trail of the Gods tomorrow. Epilogue. The first thing he was aware of was the fact that he laid in a bed. Odd, he didn't remember there being a bed by the pass. He cracked his eyes open and then closed them quickly when the light struck like red-hot daggers. Moaning, he brought his arm up and laid it over his face to block out the painful sight. He's awake, he heard a voice said. Get Jiron, another voice said, and then he heard a door open and close. James, a soft female voice said soothingly. He felt someone sit up on the bed next to him. Then a hand was placed on his chest as the voice spoke again. James? He parted his lips to say something, but was unable to speak. Here, the voice said again. Try to drink some of this. Opening his mouth, he felt the cup placed to his lips. Then, cool water slowly entered his mouth, soothing the parchedness. And when he swallowed, the liquid eased the tightness of his throat. After the cup was taken away, he croaked out, Where am I? You're in Trendle, James, the voice said, and then he recognized that it was Mary who tended him. You've been here several days. We were worried about you. MIko? Your friend is doing well, she replied. He's in Devon's room and remains very weak. We'll let him know you're awake. He nodded. The door opened, and then he felt another person sit on the bed. Man, am I glad you're back, Jiron said. Me too, James croaked. Water, he said, reaching out weakly. The cup was returned to his lips as he took another small sip. Not too much at one time, she advised. He managed a couple sips before she took it away again. Are Tessa and the others here? Yes, they made it, Jiron said happily. They're staying at Hearn's place, Mary told him. When they showed up and explained things to us, they were allowed to move in while they waited for you. Thank you. Cracking his eyes open, he saw Mary and Jiron on the bed. The light hurt, but his eyes seemed to be getting used to it. Either that or the water had somehow helped. You're welcome, Mary said. The door cracked open and he heard a small voice ask, Is he okay, Mama? Sienna, her mother said. He's fine. James heard her whisper something to another by the door when her mother said, Girls, now leave him be. He needs to rest. Yes, Mama, Sienna said, and then the door closed once more. We better go, Mary said to Jiron. He still needs a great deal of rest. All right. Getting up off the bed, he said, You rest, James. If I'm not here when you wake, I'll be with Tersa. Then Mary allowed him one more sip before she stood. Now, you sleep, she advised. It's the best thing for you right now. As they left the room, he closed his eyes. Before he drifted off to sleep once more, he recalled the message Abula-Maski had sent. The fire walks with the star. They now knew he had it, and they would be coming. That's it. That is the end of Warrior Priest of Dmon-li, Book 3 of the Morcyth Saga. Next book will be Book 4, Trail of the Gods. So basically the first 3 books, James has just been reacting to everything going on. You know, he got to the world and then everything was just pushing him forward. But Trail of the Gods, he's going to have time to start figuring things out. So that's exciting. We'll see how that goes. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know how you like the Warrior Priest. And again, subscribe if you haven't already. I appreciate it. Like it. Like's the best thing you can do. Y'all take care, and I'll see you tomorrow.